Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are here to have a conversation about North Carolina music because, as you may or may not know, 2019 is officially the year of music in North Carolina, so proclaimed by Governor Roy Cooper in November. And we have, although we talk about music a lot here, of course, on WHUP, we have a high-level conversation today. In fact, it doesn't get any higher level than this. Joining us this afternoon, we have First Lady Kristin Cooper. We have Susie Hamilton, Secretary of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and my old compadre, Wayne Martin, Director of the North Carolina Arts Council. Greetings, one and all. How are you? And thanks for coming.
Just great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Bob.
First of all, you are here in Hillsborough for a tour of several of the key components to our music scene. We're best known, I think, as a literary hub, but music has become increasingly important to this community, both economically and culturally. Why Hillsborough? There's lots of places to go to celebrate the year of music, and we're early on in 2019, but how did this come to be?
Well, I guess my answer to that would be, why not Orange County? It's long been a hotbed of music. I was reminded when we drove in of seeing the historic marker of Billy Strayhorn. Of course, visiting here in the summers and learning from his grandparents, and this long tradition of African American music, both string band and sacred, that we have here, and then all these other memories I had of Joe and Odell Thompson and the fiddle and banjo traditions, and then you layer on top of that all these contemporary artists who've come from Orange County, the Chapel Hill scene, since the 1970s. I'm thinking the list is too long to enumerate here, but it's a very rich tradition, and it's people making music because it's important to them to do it, and then there's others who take it and go places with it and become commercial successes. You have both. You have an industry here. You have record labels. You have nonprofit organizations dedicated to supporting musicians. So in a way, it's kind of like what would you call it? A snapshot of what the best practice would be for a community or a county of how to support music.
Yes, indeed, Wayne Martin. In fact, you have three primary tour stops today. You've already been to Music Maker Relief Foundation, one of our really fabulous musical institutions here. You've been there. How was that? Any what revelations did you have while touring?
It was very impressive, and since I have two daughters who graduated with arts degrees from Carolina, and listening to them talking about all the relief that they give to struggling artists, and it made me realize that I better, always have a big basement in my house for my kids to live in.
A home studio.
Yeah,
yes.
Maybe.
A home studio. Anybody else?
The work that they're doing there is really remarkable. I think my takeaway was that it's affording us the opportunity to preserve a culture that otherwise really would have been lost. Their program targets musicians who are low income and who are 55 years or older, and they're in need of certain things that can give them the stability and the foundation to where they can continue to make their music, and to preserve that history and that culture for generations to come is just incredible. And what a creative and innovative way to go about doing that.
Indeed. And Wayne, I know you're very familiar with Music Maker. You have participated in some of their projects. What's an example? What have you done with them?
Well, early on, in fact, Tim Duffy, the founder, reminded me today that of all the work that he did for a $1,500 grant from the North Carolina Arts Council back in 1987 or 1988. But we tried to support their documentary work, and then later on, when we saw all the extensive programming that they've been doing in North Carolina, we try to give them operating support as well to be part of the infrastructure of nonprofit arts organizations, arts councils. And the Orange County Arts Commission was there, Katie Murray. You know, it was really inspiring to see the quality of the work they do. And also I have to give a shout out to radio and live radio, because I think that is a key component of what a vital music scene looks like. And what you're doing here, and there's some other radio stations across the state that are making an effort to bring local musicians in to program North Carolina music. I mean, we've got WPAQ in Mount Airy AM that was one of the very first.
The great-granddaddy, yes.
The great-granddaddy.
Yes.
But what you're doing is really, really important.
Well, I appreciate that. We have more live music, I think, in this studio on a weekly basis than anybody else does. It's 3, 4, 5 times a week. So that has been a focal point of ours, and people really are responding to it. The musicians love it, and the audience loves it too. So,
well, that's the purpose of the marketing program Come Here NC for 2019, and it's Come Here HEAR NC, and the idea is to promote these kinds of institutions like radio stations and like music makers, so that there's more awareness about them throughout the state, so the programs are better utilized and we generate more interest and support. So we're very excited about all the things we have going on this next year.
Now, your third stop, once you leave here, will be Red Eye Distribution /Yep Rock Records. It is a real jewel to have them here. They had been over in Haw River, and they have relocated first their offices and now their distribution warehouse here. So great to have them. We partner with them a lot on various projects. They brought some of their artists into the studio. But it's really amazing to have a label and a distribution outlet that understands the modern music landscape, because the business has changed so dramatically. And I want to talk about that a little bit later on. But are you familiar with Red Eye, or are you going to be just kind of going in eyes wide open?
It's going to be a learning experience for me, like most of the things I do. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, indeed. Okay, and that was, of course, First Lady Kristin Cooper. Susie, have you are you acquainted with? Of course, you're from Wilmington, the beach music capital of the world. Are you a beach music aficionado?
I don't want to insult anybody that likes beach music, yes. But it's not really my scene. But I'm not familiar with the business either, so this will be a learning experience for me as well. Although I believe they participated in the kickoff with the governor and Mrs. Cooper at the Executive Mansion in November.
They did.
So they,
yes.
I did get to meet her, but that's all I know at this point.
We learned about Susie's taste in music and our last stop, and who she had to play at her wedding reception.
Who did you get to play?
Orange County natives, Doug Clark and the Hot Nuts.
Oh, you did.
And they were wonderful.
Fairly racy choice.
It was a wonderful choice, and no one declined the invitation to my wedding reception.
Nice.
Well, I have been to Red Eye and Yep Rock, and I was shocked at the scale and what they're doing, and the national scope, and especially given the difficulty these days in distributing and marketing recordings. Of course, they're doing it through the internet and all the modern ways that you have to do it in order to make a go of it. But they also, they have the tangible products too, the LPs, the CDs, and are able to get those out. And I'm very grateful for that, because it's increasingly harder.
It is increasingly difficult. There's so many more facets to it. I mean, you still have to make the records and you still have to distribute them, but now you have all these digital platforms. Yes. You have to tap into that, all these partnerships you have to create, the licensing issues, all of that, and they cover every one of those bases. They have people on top of it.
And the overarching question of how do you deal with this when music is free on the internet?
Indeed, yes. The musicians grapple with this as well, of course. So you're going to be going over there now. Red Eye and Yep Rock were collaborating with Oxford American, which published its annual Southern Music issue on North Carolina, and the rollout for that was the official kickoff of the Year of Music. That must have been fun. We did have an Oxford American representative come on our morning news show here and talk about how all of that evolved. One thing that's really interesting about that project is the diversity of the material. It covers so much ground. And I imagine in dealing with the Year of Music and so many components to it, how do you pick and choose? How do you curate amongst so many different kinds of music? There's the highbrow and the lower brow. There's the traditional. There's the contemporary. There's all the different styles without it seeming like just kind of a mishmash.
I'm going to let Wayne answer that question, but I do want to appreciate your use of the word curate, because I think that is exactly what this effort has involved. It is so rich and it is so diverse. And we are so blessed as North Carolinians that all of these beautiful traditions have come from our home state. But curate is really, I think, the operative word there.
Well, let's go back. Go ahead, Wayne. Answer that question.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you have so many different styles of music, so many incredible musicians, both historic and contemporary, how do you go about that? I mean, I think that there are two things. One is that we're trying to offer ways that people can come forward with their own ideas to the North Carolina Arts Council and the department to, present those and see and compete to get some funding to do those kinds of projects that relate to music. But for us, it's also the filter, I think, has got to be we've got to tell the story of North Carolina through our music, the stories of the people and the communities. I mean, and educate our citizens about who we are as a people culturally. I mean, ultimately, that's one of the main goals of the whole project. I mean, we've got the economic development. It's huge. We're a creative state, and the creative sector contributes billions of dollars to our economy. But at the base of it, it is really an effort. For the first time, I think, in a long time, we have leadership in place that appreciates music both for its economic value, but also on an intrinsic level and for its historic importance to North Carolina. But it's a time now, I think, for our own citizens to immerse themselves a bit in our North Carolina music traditions. So that's kind of the filter, if you will. And then I think we're open to all sorts of different projects, as you name it. I mean, we have great jazz musicians, string band musicians, gospel musicians, contemporary Americana. I mean, but again, it's, what is the story that you're trying to tell? We're not here just to promote music per se, but it's for a bigger purpose, which is for our people and for our communities.
That makes sense. The genesis of this, 2019, why 2019 as the Year of Music? I think partly it has to do with an administrative shift. Susie, I imagine, well, let's just say that we are happy here that the legislature did not have to approve the naming of 2019 as the Year of Music. But that aside, Susie, was this partly driven by your own thinking about how to support and promote the arts in North Carolina?
Yeah, well, I will say this, that luckily natural and cultural resources in North Carolina is a bipartisan thing. However, the support that our department gets from the governor's office and the encouragement we get is critical to being successful in putting these programs together. The real brainchild behind this effort is my marketing director, a lady by the name of Catherine Swain, and she came right out of Elon University and went straight to New York, and she was an executive producer for VH1. And so the credit I can take is being smart enough to hire her. And Wayne,
is she among the
she's
entourage
among the group
in the
right
house?
there. She's now looking at me with stink eye.
Welcome, welcome, Ms. Swain. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
And of course, with Wayne's background in music, personally, professionally, the two things just have made a whole lot of sense. And they brought the idea to the First Lady and I, and to me, and we said, oh yeah, we can make this work. So all of 2018 was spent in preparation to do the 2019 Year of Music, Come Here and See. So we feel pretty lucky, and that the wonderful thing about it is it just kind of quietly happened and emerged, and the next thing we know, we've got a year-long program to celebrate our musical culture.
Well, you can begin to tap into this as it unfolds through the North Carolina Arts Council website, ncarts.org. And then you can hit the Year of Music tab, or just continue on with /music. And you've got a whole bunch of stuff there, and it's beginning to take shape. You're adding content on a regular basis. I believe our fabulous show host, Sandra Davidson, is integrally involved in that. She is here also in the house. Hey. She's such an asset to us, to the station and her program, she and her, and I imagine she's the same.
And to us.
Yes, indeed. And you have a bunch of components to this, including sort of an overview of what this is, but these artist spotlights, and you have a Spotify playlist series that you, Wayne, are co-curating, I guess, along with music director Carly Jones. Is that correct?
On the Spotify list?
Yes, the
well,
Spotify
I think we're
playlist.
we're getting recommendations from a lot of people throughout the year on key, essential North Carolina music to listen to learn about, and we are engaged with folks out in the state who are doing some really interesting projects. There's work around the great jazz drummer Max Roach, for example, Nina Simone. We're looking at some helping present some really fascinating field work done by Frank Warner and Ann Warner back in the beginning of the 1930s all the way through the 1950s that yielded the great field recording of Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dula, which was subsequently picked up by the Kingston Trio that launched the folk revival. We're taking on projects like that have historical significance, and trying to figure out, how can that be presented to more people so that they can learn about this. And in some cases, like the Warner Project, we actually want to tour that to the communities where the Warners went and did the field work. They did field work on the coast, and in Ebenezer Church community outside of Raleigh, and of course in Beach Mountain. And I mean, can you imagine taking that back now to those communities and the families? Well, they'll hear the music, they'll see the photographs, they'll hear the children of the Warners talk about those experiences because they accompanied them on their parents on that trip. So it's a combination of really interesting educational projects, along with some allocation of some grant funds for our nonprofit network across the state to present their own ideas about how to tell the story of North Carolina through music.
Some of the links, you have a 365 days of music. Does that mean one additional post every day?
Every day. Some
really interesting links that you can scour, including something about the Carolina Chamber Music Festival, profile of John D. Loudermilk, one of our assets. People don't know he was from Durham. You have the Spotify playlists, something about North Carolina Symphony, a couple of classic North Carolina albums posts. Those are always fun. artist spotlights.
And contentious, let me say that, everybody.
Yes, of course. Artist spotlights. I did appreciate the fact that the artist spotlights, some of them are contemporary. You had Mipso, and I really appreciated that because folding contemporary music into this, I think, is really important. But beyond the website presence, you have other things that you're doing. Wayne, you referred to a few field recording projects, but also you're going to be involved in some festivals locally, and that's a really good way. There's been a proliferation of really incredibly great festivals, not just your sort of old school music festival, but some really innovative ideas for bringing musicians together. And so that's something that you're doing as part of this as well?
Oh, yes. So there are some great festivals across the state, from the mountains to the coast. And one thing that we wanted to make certain that we did is support North Carolina musicians. So a lot of our festivals have become, national venues for performing arts, really. And we just wanted to make certain that there was a big North Carolina presence, so we are sponsors for a number of festivals, and what that mainly means is that we are asking them to program North Carolina musicians prominently at the event. So we've got a number of those going on in 2019.
So there'll be a North Carolina stage in some cases,
Yes.
and others they'll just program North Carolina artists. What are some of the festivals that you're looking forward to?
Well, Merle Fest is always a great
Of course,
one.
there's Merle Fest, which is so huge now.
Yes,
It's a massive undertaking.
Yes, that's what was the National Folk Festival, now this Greensboro Folk Festival. Art of Cool.
Now that's outside the box.
Yeah,
that's good. Yes.
Yeah. So it's we're. I think these festivals, I know from my own sons. Now I have two sons who are approaching 30, and I've seen how they kind of relate to music primarily through going to these events and participating at festivals, and I think it's going to be a great way for us to reach younger people who are interested in music, and we'll be able to tell them about what North Carolina has to offer in terms of contemporary performing musicians. They know a lot about, for instance, my son, about certain strata of performers, but this will give them a chance to kind of broaden their palette.
Well, I like that, and that is one question: is how do you bring young people and new generations into the fold? There's a tendency to focus on musical genres and some of the better-known artists associated with them, and that's part of spotlighting North Carolina music. You've got Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, Earl Scruggs, Doc Watson, Nina Simone, Shirley Caesar. All those folks are going to be part of the big picture. But then you have this whole new dynamic that's being created because those genre boundaries, partly because the business has changed, are dissolving, and people are creating new hybrids, and a lot of those are young musicians on the cutting edge, super talented, but not necessarily fitting into a traditional mold. How are you going to incorporate some of these incubators of original music into this year of music and the concept?
Well, one thing that we're doing is look at the origins of hip hop in North Carolina, for example. I mean, we're not supporting a festival. We're looking at supporting a documentary on some really key artists who have done a lot to bring and shape hip hop in North Carolina. So, I'd say that our desire would be that, from a selfish point of view, that the Arts Council itself would be able to learn from the year of music and be introduced to people that we haven't intersected with on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis in the past, and that as you look forward into the future of who is the arts going to serve, that these groups will be looked at as partners, as collaborators. And I think that's a really important service that this Year of Music can do for our institution. That's a selfish way to look at it, but it will help us and hopefully open some doors.
And how do these new bands, like I was telling you about one of my favorite bands, Teleco out of Asheville, just so talented and original, and yet they're using mostly traditional instruments, but they are not traditional. How do they access some of these platforms that in the past were limited to older musicians or people who were strictly identified as traditional, using a particular definition? And how do they how do they tap into the department or the council?
Well, I tell you that our music director, Carly Jones, is about 32 years old, and she is or through colleagues like Sandra Davidson, who are really interested and knowledgeable about what's going on in the contemporary music scene, and really eager to establish these connections. So if just for the department, I can just say all these artists and musicians just need to talk to Carly or Sandra, and they will get a very warm reception, and there'll be tons of ideas that are generated. Every time I come to the office, it's like there's another idea about how we can intersect with people who are making music in North Carolina today, and many of them are young.
Carly also sang at the mansion, and I have to say that Wayne has done a great job at having a presence in every single county in the state. And I had the privilege of being on the Arts Council board for a couple of terms, and worked on the education subcommittee that was aimed at bringing arts, to kids, and bringing a lot of visiting artists into schools where they could actually reach out to kids. And the First Lady's office is part of our traveling around our 100-county tour. We've hit 62. But we frequently will visit an arts council, and I think you were there with us when we got to see one of those visiting artists actually reaching out, to one of the classes and in one of the schools. So I think one reason, although we kid about it, that we do enjoy such bipartisan support is because we have an impact. The Arts Council has an impact in every single county, and constituents of everyone can see the benefits.
One of the main goals of this effort also is accessibility. Just because you're not a musician, which I am not a musician, but so maybe it's
She's
a little
a dancer.
Right, a little more detached from it. It doesn't seem, maybe a little afraid of it because I'm not sure. But we wanted to humanize this very much and make it more accessible to people who may not themselves be musicians, but we all enjoy music. It's such an important part of our lives as human beings, and so I think that accessibility is certainly a main goal for me. And one other thing I'll say is, as our public education has gotten more aligned with science, technology, engineering, and math, we've left a void for humanities and music and visual arts, and I think that these kinds of efforts and the role of this department is to fill that void and hopefully encourage others to put it back in as a most important part of our mainstream education, because there are so many connections and similarities between the science mind and the musical mind and the math mind and visual arts and all of those things. They're so closely related to one another, and I think we forget that as a country sometimes, and if we can affect any change that improves that situation, that's what we want to do.
So the effort has to really be intentional, though.
Yes.
It's not really like they're going to come to you because maybe they haven't in the past.
Right. But
and there's
we're going
an
to go to
assumption
them.
so you are going to do the outreach.
Yeah.
I guess that's and hiring people who have that natural access is one way, but also creating programs and specific initiatives to bring those people in is another thing. And so you'll be thinking about that, I imagine. in the months to come?
We use the word intentional on a regular basis.
Well, let me just mention one example. So we have in North Carolina, we created a music trail first in Western North Carolina and then in Eastern North Carolina. The one in Western North Carolina has an artist directory, and as does the one in the African American music trails in Eastern North Carolina. And our folk life director, Sally Peterson, has created a millennial project to look at young people who are in those communities where these music traditions have been prominent and were shaped and created, and encouraging them and having conversations with them about what they need in order to make their art today. So it is, it is intentional. We are reaching out to try to figure out what people need today as opposed to what they needed, when I was 30 years old. It's different. Some of it's the same, but some of it's different.
Well, in that regard, of course, the business of music has changed fairly radically over the past couple of decades. It's been democratized, which is great. It's more accessible through online platforms, home studios, and all of that. I can find stuff from all over the world that I never would have had access to. Of course, it's more difficult to actually generate revenue. But how has the business of arts agencies and arts management changed along with the business of music, would you say?
Well, you might have to be a little bit more specific in the sense. I mean, I think for us as an agency, the mission is still the same. How do the arts, how can they be utilized? How can they be sustained and utilized to help our people in our communities? That's our overall mission. But within, when you look at music and the changes that have occurred for in terms of how difficult it is to be a successful commercial artist. I mean, it is very, very difficult today. So the only thing I just want to go back to giving some credit here to our leadership, because I've worked in North Carolina government, lived in North Carolina for decades, worked in government for 30 years, and this is the first time when we've had leadership, a governor, secretaries in place that realize the importance of this. If you think about it, music's an intangible cultural resource. It's something that's played and then it disappears into the air and into the memory. And I've seen so many times before this people who have come to Raleigh and basically taken music for granted. I think they liked music, but they didn't really think about it. They just okay, it's around. In this case, I think having a state agency that says it is important is a first step.
I guess what I was driving at there was technology has been at the root of a lot of these changes in the business, and I imagine that new technologies are something that the Arts Council and your agency really have to look closely at, not just as a way to administer your own programs, but as a way to reach people. And certainly this website that we've been talking about, ncarts.org, and your online presence is really the primary way that people are going to tap into the year of music as far as you're concerned. So I imagine you've had to make some adjustments, do new ways of approaching your outreach and your publicity and even your events.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, the artist profiles that we did last year was Arts Council's 50th, and the artist profiles that Sandra Davidson did I think were the primary ways that we did 50 of them, 50 artist profiles for 50 years that we've been in existence. And those that were pushed out on social media, I think was probably the primary way that we got the word out about the Arts Council. She asked them 2 questions, what is it about North Carolina that's influenced your art? It shaped you as an artist. And then what needs to be in place for you to continue to do your work and for North Carolina to be an arts-rich place. And that's how we got the message out more than probably any other way.
So social media, of course, a key element these days, and you have to have people who understand it and embrace it, even if it's not their thing. So that's something, I guess, that you are slowly it's incorporating.
I would just say that we can't forget, and the one thing we've learned as we travel around is that there are still broad swaths of North Carolina that don't have broadband. So we still need, that traditional one-on-one outreach that we've done in the past, in addition to this. Particularly, in a lot of our younger kids. I mean, sometimes in the county, the only broadband is at the school.
Again, it's very parallel to what you'll see at Red Eye. They have to keep making the records the way they always did, even vinyl, but they have to also deal with the new reality of the business and the digital platforms. So I did want to talk about support for the arts. It's always tough to generate support. Susie, we're talking about, education and how arts is always the first thing to be cut and the last thing to be restored. And, they're sharing classrooms for music teachers. And it's just been a very difficult argument to make. And yet, as some of you are aware, the North Carolina Americans, the Americans for the Arts, AFTA, had a study. And it's on your website, Wayne, showing that the nonprofit arts and culture industry generates $2.12 billion with a B in direct economic activity in North Carolina, supporting 72,000 full-time equivalent jobs and $201.5 million in revenue for local governments in the state. That's big. That's big numbers. Right. And in Orange County here, we had $85.4 million, and this is just 1 year, 3,352 jobs and an $8 million return to local and state coffers. So it seems like there's an argument to be made there, but how can you leverage that kind of information into support at the state and local level and to convince people that the arts are actually not just good, feel-good stuff, but a worthy investment?
That's a great question. And I like to answer that question when I'm asked by reminding people that North Carolina was the first state in the country to have a state-sponsored symphony. So it's in our DNA in this state to support music and to be a creative economy. And we've done a really great job in this state. And frankly, I think through public education, even though you're right, we are the ones that are first to be cut. But these are the experiences as a person who was educated in North Carolina in the public school system that I remember more than any other. And we have, of the 75,000 jobs you mentioned, 25,000 of those are directly related to music. So as our economy evolves and our communities, progress in this country, more and more having that critical thinking skill that is so firmly developed through the study of arts and humanities and music is really going to play, and it already is playing a very important role in our economy. And, I consider the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources an economic development department. We do it a little differently than traditional sources for economic development. Those are very important programs and activities as well. Obviously, we support them. I believe that natural and cultural resources, however, has the ability to really drill down to the local level and to remind people in these communities that may be economically distressed, Tier 1 counties, Tier 2 counties, that, sometimes you just got to go with what God gave you, and you got to make You got to tell your story. Every county in North Carolina has its own unique culture and its own story to tell. And so much of that has to do with music and architecture and preserving place and preserving the culture and pride of that community. And when you do that, great things can happen. It happened in downtown Hillsborough. It's happened in downtown Wilmington. It's happened in Asheville. It's happened all over this country by focusing on those assets that are right there in front of you, and all 100 counties have them. So it is an economic development proposition to support the arts and to advance the arts and to recognize it as part of the economy.
Of course, music scenes are fundamentally local by definition.
That's right.
What is the role of the state in supporting the arts? Now, Wayne, of course, you oversee the North Carolina Arts Council's grant programs, which distribute funds, a significant amount of funds every year, to help local communities spotlight their own art scenes. But is there something beyond that that the state should be doing or can be doing to support these counties and communities?
So another first for North Carolina is that in the 1970s, when we rewrote the Constitution, the North Carolina State Constitution, we adopted an agency in the state constitution for cultural resources, which became the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources ultimately. And that, again, it shows another commitment to the effort. And in our mission statement, we are recognized as what they call non-formal education arm of the state of North Carolina. So beyond just the music scene, it is our mission and our job to educate and to promote. And we do that every day, 365 days a year. The beautiful thing about this department is that I've got employees that are working there that have been there for their entire career, and nobody's getting rich working for the Natural and Cultural Resources Department. But these are labors of love, and these are educators, and these are artists, and these are people that feel so strongly and are so right as to how important it is for our children and the population at large. So not only are we handing out money, we're educating people, and we're helping open those doors so that they take an interest and learn more on their own.
Makes a lot of sense. Wayne, go ahead.
Well, we have a lot of good stories to tell. So we've been talking about the economic development data you mentioned, which is very powerful. But if you look in education, what do the arts do to help students succeed in school and then beyond? How have the arts affected and improved health care? I mean, one of the best examples are the pilot project that the NEA is doing that we have collaborated with on looking at how arts can heal traumatic brain injuries.
Yep. So our veterans.
That is for our veterans and our and active military personnel. That's in addition to the intrinsic value of the arts. So I feel like I've got some of the most powerful arguments to make, and in fact, I had an experience not that long ago with one of the leaders of the legislature when I came into the office and I was about to speak, and he held up his hand and said, "You don't even have to say anything to me. I realize that the arts are absolutely essential to my to my county," and he represents a very rural county. And I thought, well, gosh, we've come a long way if that is the case. I think there are a few people who still just have this thing that government should not fund very much at all.
Yes, of course.
and that includes not only the arts but other kinds of essential services. So we're looking at that. I mean, that's a bigger another kind of argument. But I think, not to be Pollyanna about it, but I do think that as far as some of these major ways that the arts are helping people and helping communities, we're making a really powerful and persuasive argument.
And a program that Wayne started a few years ago, we could spend an entire session on. The A+ school program is a critical component as well. So maybe we'll come back and do more on that.
Okay. Well, we would invite you back. First Lady Cooper, any final thoughts on that?
I'd just like to add what Wayne said. I mean, one reason that the governor and I have been such strong supporters of the arts is that, our family music has been so important to us as a family, and our daughters they pretty much sang at the same time they could talk. So we grew up seeing the effect it had on them. None of them were great athletes, so they all were in the chorus and in the and did theater. Not every kid's good at sports, but that gave them a team and and friends and added meaning to their lives, and it was just something we did as a family. So we know how important it is to kids and to families in this state, and that it's one of those essentials to having just a healthy, productive, high quality life.
We have been talking with First Lady Kristin Cooper, Susie Hamilton, the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and Wayne Martin, the North Carolina Arts Council. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We are really just getting on track, but we would invite you back anytime, individually or collectively, to continue this conversation. 2019, the year of music in North Carolina. Thank you all for coming. You're listening to WHUP in Hillsborough. See you on the flip side.